Hey everybody, welcome to today's video. We're back working on the Ford Ranger Turbo project again, and I got some good news today. We're finally going to start this thing up. Alright, so in the last video we worked to get the other engine out. I've done a lot of work to the truck since then. As you can see, I have the new engine in, the turbo's installed, the oil and water line's plumbed up to the turbo, all the accessories are hooked up and everything's ready to go. What I haven't worked on yet is the intercooler, piping, things like that, because I want to run this truck a little bit before I go ahead and hook all that stuff up, and the truck would then require a tune to run. So I mentioned in an earlier video that I had the stock injectors in this still just so I could run it. So to support that, I put the stock intake tube on using the stock MAF and the IAT sensor, and that'll let the truck run just like it would have before. It really won't know any difference versus the previous engine that had the stock pistons and things like that. So it should really run just fine until I can get it broken in a little bit, and then I'll go ahead and put everything else on. I did also finish the exhaust. It still exits in front of the rear tire just like before, but now it's all 3-inch and stainless steel. So now that that's finished, we're at a point now that we could actually run and drive this truck around just fine, even though the turbo's installed and it's not hooked up to anything. It really doesn't hurt anything to do that, and the truck, like I said, doesn't really know any different than it was before. So as my plan right now is just to run it a little bit, drive it around, just get it broken in a little bit, go ahead and change oil out, get the brake-in oil out of it that's in it right now, then go ahead and get charge piping, intercooler, things like that installed. So let's go ahead and start this up and see what it sounds like. Yeah, so it's running pretty good. I'm really happy with how it turned out so far. I'm glad that my rebuild, which I don't know if I mentioned in earlier videos, is really the first full engine rebuild that I've done before. Seems to have turned out pretty well so far. No noises or anything like that, so I'm pretty happy. So what's left on the list? There's a couple things, mostly intercooler piping, charge piping, intercooler piping. I need a MAF. I need a wideband O2 sensor. A couple things like that that are still left to buy, and go ahead and figure out how I'm going to install them. As far as the intercooler setup, I've decided to go with a water-to-air intercooler. It's not something this kind of project really needs, but I thought it'd be cool to do. So I'm probably going to go ahead and mount that right where the stock airbox is currently, since that will no longer be there once I take the stock intake tube off. Then the heat exchanger for that will go out in front, similar to just any other sort of radiator. For the MAF, I'm switching over to a slot MAF of some sort. I haven't decided exactly which one I'm going to use yet. I do have the housing for it, but I just need to go ahead and buy the actual MAF. As far as a wideband O2 sensor, this truck, I still have a catalytic converter on this truck, and it has an extra bung for an O2 sensor that I'm not using because the turbo manifold has one, and then the catalytic converter had two, one before and after the catalytic material. So I've only used the one after that, and then the one on the exhaust manifold. So I'm probably going to go ahead and put the wideband O2 sensor there. It'd be super convenient. I don't have to weld any other bungs into the exhaust. So that's where that's going to go. And then once I've done that, I'll go ahead and put the 60-pound injectors in that I had in before, and then at that point I won't be able to run the truck again until it gets tuned. Alright, so one of the things I wanted to talk about today was how I fit this turbo in on the stock manifold in the Ford Ranger application. So the stock manifold puts the turbo in a rear mount situation like you see here, which interferes with the AC box on these Ford Rangers. So basically you're going to end up deleting your air conditioning if you want to keep this sort of configuration. On top of that, if you wanted to maintain the function of your air vents in your truck, so if you still want to have heat, you have to do something with the cover to gain some clearance from the turbo so you don't have any sort of major interference like you would if it was left alone. So what I ended up doing is I cut the cover out completely on this, and I made a new one out of fiberglass. I used some fiberglass mat and resin, and I covered that in the shiny insulation material you see here to protect it from any heat that's going to get to it from the turbo. I'm also going to be blanketing the turbo, which should help shield that a little bit from all that heat. But like I said, something you might want to consider if you're going to do this sort of a swap on your truck. The other options out there are the flip brackets, and I think I talked about these early on, maybe in the very first video of this series, which was my original plan, was to go ahead and flip this manifold, which would have put this turbo up further forward. But what I ended up finding out on these Rangers is you end up with a lot of interference between either the coil packs, because you got these two coil packs here on these, and also down at the alternator. You can see even right now the turbo is pretty close to the back of the alternator. And when I flipped the manifold over, it was pretty much going to want to live right where the alternator and the coil packs live, which would have created a heck of a lot more work for me, fabrication-wise and relocation of the alternator and things like that. It just wasn't really worth it to me. So yeah, I am going to lose my air conditioning. I honestly don't really care too much. This truck's more of a toy, and I do drive it in the summertime, but half the point of driving these things around is with the windows down anyway, so I don't generally use the air conditioning as it is. But like I said, something I wanted to cover, just something to consider when you do this to your own truck. If air conditioning is really important to you, then you're going to want to consider some other way around that to let you keep that. Something I haven't really talked a whole lot about in these videos is what I'm doing interior-wise in this truck. You probably saw the boost gauge earlier whenever I started it up. I have a gauge pod here that's a steering column mounted gauge pod. This is actually for the late 90s, early 2000s F-150. And I was under the impression that these were sort of going to be a direct fit. Everything I read online said that. I did have some fitment problems whenever I tried to do this. So I ended up doing this piece originally extends all the way around. I cut this off and put a little trim piece on it. It looks pretty decent. I'm happy with it overall. But that's a good location for the boost gauge, so that's what I'm doing there. I also mentioned earlier that I'm going to have a wideband O2, and I'm going to put the gauge for that right here in this vent. I do have a vent pod. I just haven't installed it yet, but there's a company out there, you can get them on eBay. They make vent pods for these that allow you to put a standard size gauge in there. So that's going to be a convenient place to have that as well. But that's pretty much it for interior. There's really not much else to do in here. I mean, I've done the console and bucket seats earlier in this project, and I'm pretty happy with how the interior looks in this truck. But as far as stuff related to the turbo project, that's going to be about it. Just a couple gauges that I need. All right, so the recap: we need an intercooler and piping, we need a mass airflow sensor and a wideband O2 sensor, and we need tuning. And that's mostly it. It's a fair amount of work involved in all those things. It doesn't sound like it, but there's a lot of work left to do. So I think next I'm going to tackle the intercooler installation. I might do an installation video on that since it's not something you normally see, using the water to air setups like that. So stay tuned for that. That's going to be it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give me a thumbs up. And as always, if you're not subscribed, please subscribe and stay tuned for the next video. Thanks for watching.